for that. And also too, as we realize too, like health is a really critical piece now too. So with that, I want to go through and introduce you to Andra, who is the Executive Director of the U.S. Department of Commerce Minority Business Development Agency. And can you tell us a little bit about what the agency does and what you see as well as some opportunities now, kind of coming down the pipe basically for us at various local levels and also municipal and state-wise?
Thank you. I'd love to. So I work with the Minority Business Development Agency, which is now officially its own federal agency. For a long time, we still operate under the Department of Commerce, but we're now our own fiscal agency. And we're the only agency in the entire federal government that's tasked with only assisting minority-owned firms, right? So when we speak of Hispanic, African-American, Asian, and some of the other minority groups within the United States, we're the only agency that's tasked with that. The other element of what we do is, my job is to help companies, entrepreneurs, grow, expand through governmental contracting at the federal and at the local level, which we consider SLAED, which is state, local, and education. And my team and I, that is our whole focus, is if a small company comes to us and they want to expand through governmental contracting, which we consider economic development, my job is to help target, qualify, and secure that work. That's what we do.
Wonderful. And what type of, what are you seeing now basically with the Biden administration in terms of any changes, any additional opportunities that you see really kind of coming down? Are there going to be different changes in terms of, the way people can access the different funds available, the different amounts of contracts, the different programs?
Great question. So the truth is, yes, there are a lot of changes coming. There are budgeting elements coming out. Some of you may have heard about them, some of the transportation initiatives that are going on, which is going to help a lot of local governments, right? There's going to be an enormous amount of that. Some of the other changes, I was just on another conference call earlier, and even the Small Business Administration, which is also tasked with helping small businesses in general, the federal government has a goal of up to 23% of every federal contracting dollar going to a small business. And there's conversations about raising that to 30%. And we're talking trillions of dollars. So if that's passed, even if it's not passed, the amount of budget allocations that are coming down for contracting and nonprofits, and even some of the grant elements, a lot of people have already seen some of the grants that have come out, but there's going to be many more coming out. They're coming out all the time. So it's the best opportunity right now to not just start a business, but grow a business and become self-sustaining through the element of economic development.
No, thank you. And, and I think as, others had mentioned previously, we really want to thank, Andra and the government for a great amount of the efforts that have been put forth over the last year and a half. This has been a very challenging time. And I think if we have the opportunity and a magic wand to go back, there's certain things we all would do a little bit different, but you don't know what you don't know. And I think right now it's incumbent upon us to really try to help make sure that we are allowing a lot of our small businesses, and helping them access the resources that are available. So I think there are two different challenges. On one side, where PPP is the easiest one to take a look at, but there is a challenge in terms of number one, making sure that people just have access, that they're aware of it and they're able to get an application in. The other point, like I said, is then up to the SBA in terms of whether they're actually going through, and making sure that there is a representative amount, and that the funds are being released on that side. But we've seen both challenges. I think another one was the shuttered venues. That I can't tell you how few, I think potential organizations that could qualify didn't even apply. And actually having to almost force them to apply, was really kind of the case. And I think some were very, very pleasantly surprised to be able to go through and realize. So I think there are a lot of resources available. I think there are some obstacles. Once again, I think, I'm having flashbacks in terms of working with Rosy basically through late hours, and Jesus and Monica and my team in terms of, trying to make sure that we are putting on almost trainings like daily at some point to help people, make sure that they were having the necessary financial documents kind of up to snuff to be able to just go through and get the application in. And I think now we're kind of at a point now where there's still funds available, but now it's really helping to support, the technical assistance side and making sure that we're kind of building the bigger tent, at that point. And then as we kind of realized too, like through COVID, COVID is kind of exposed, every single disparity, and it amplified it to, 100 times. It has ripped the Band-Aid off. It has ripped the Band-Aid off, everything from the opportunity gap in education to the disparity in terms of accessing capital for small businesses to the inequities basically within the criminal justice system. And so I think that, through this, we've been very pleased to be able to start thinking about different areas that we start advocating for. And one of them has been, different areas in terms of criminal justice, in terms of looking at some of the challenges on that side. How do we make it a little bit easier to be able to go through and make sure that people are getting, put on parole, in terms of this side? How do we make sure that, the bail bond market basically is not going through and, finding itself in terms of this kind of predatory kind of situation? How to make sure, obviously, that the payday loan companies don't turn into business payday loan companies, and going through and supporting 40% interest loans, under the guise of, this is COVID relief funds. So there's been a lot of, I think, challenge. And so I think we're really fortunate to have somebody from the Colorado Hispanic Bar Association and the chair, John Booker, with us, who actually focuses his practice on criminal law. So with that, I just want to ask you about your practice and what the Colorado Hispanic Chamber or Bar Association is doing right now, and what are the ways that we can help partner with you and you can partner with all of us.
I appreciate that. I appreciate the introduction. As you mentioned, my day job is a criminal defense attorney. Our firm specializes in criminal defense and immigration defense. So we are very much on the individual level, less on the corporate side. So on a day-to-day basis, I see many individuals who are first generation, who are immigrants themselves, who oftentimes do not speak English, or English is a second language. And their interactions with our justice system are generally never positive, at least in those initial phases. I mean, a lot of times we see individuals who are unwilling, to initiate divorce proceedings, unwilling to call police for fear that their immigration status is going to become known. And so what we have tried to do with the Hispanic Bar Association is, it's an organization that's been around for 44 years. It was founded under the principle of, we want to support our community. And that community is both Hispanic attorneys, and the professional advancement of those attorneys, but also support of our Hispanic community here in Colorado. And so we try to do that in a number of ways. We have established a number of committees. For example, I'm going to give a shout to Matt Baca, who's our chair of our Nominations and Endorsements Committee. It's a wonderful portion of our organization that's exclusively dedicated to vetting and advancing judicial nominees that have demonstrated a substantial interest, a substantial commitment to advancing Hispanic issues in community. We have a pro bono department that we have partnered with several organizations, and I think we may speak about this a little bit later. But we staff that with our attorneys, and we have a very diverse practice area. We have litigators, we have transactional attorneys, and we make a point of ensuring that the staffing has a diversity of practice area. And then Mikasa, our partner, for example, does a lot of the publication. So they will bring members of the community to the table who otherwise wouldn't really have access to the legal community. A lot of times someone thinks, can I talk to a lawyer? Well, they're expensive, there's cost prohibitive, there's a language barrier potentially. And we try to overcome that by making this free legal resource available every month, in which our attorneys meet with individuals, give feedback, point them in the right direction, provide them with legal resources, so that they are able to make decisions. We used to have a very small business legal night that has now been kind of merged with the general questions, but individuals who are trying to, how do I incorporate the business? How do I obtain a patent? How do I establish a copyright? These are questions that they can present to attorneys at no cost, in a safe, confidential setting, and be able to get that advice that otherwise wouldn't be available to them. We also are engaged heavily in education. So we provide a lot of continuing legal education credits to our member attorneys. Some of our past presidents were integral in advancing the new equity, diversity, and inclusion COE accreditation requirement. So just recently, the Colorado Supreme Court indicated that beginning this year, there's going to be 2 credits that are required of all attorneys across the state on the topic of equity, diversity, and inclusion. That was something that was championed by our members in partnership with the other diverse bar associations. And I think it's just a tremendous accomplishment and shows how far we have come as an inclusive legal community here in Colorado. And to your last point on public policy, it's something else that we have participated in previously, and I'm trying to make a greater focus this year. I think it's important for an organization like ours to take positions, especially on subject matters that is important to our community, on politics, on race, on public events. We are making a point that we need to be at the table because we are trying to represent our community and be a voice for those who otherwise haven't been heard. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And, I remember exactly a long time ago, I think Federico Pena telling me when I was about 15 years old that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So I think it's important to be able to go through, and I think public policy is a great way to be able to do that. So with that, in terms of the spirit of collaboration that I'm going to ask the Attorney General to kind of kick off the conversation with, I also wanted to make sure that I mentioned to him that a good collective, a friend of both of ours, mutual friend, Steve Hillard. And I don't know, Mr. Attorney General, if you know that we know know Steve very well, but I just was having a conversation with him and he told me to tell you hi. So I'd mentioned that we were having this little event coming on.
Well, so I believe Steve was the first or one of the very few Anglos to be honored by the Colorado Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Is that right?
Yeah. And yeah, absolutely.
And that's an important reminder, and it's one I take very seriously, about allies in diversity, equity, inclusion. Someone was just saying this to me, that if you can't get white people talking about understanding and caring about inclusion, it's not going to happen. And that's one of the important points, and John mentioned it well. Having a bar requirement, it's important. And it's not easy, because for a lot of people and for a long time, talking about issues involving race, involving ethnicity, involving difference, it's hard. And part of the spirit of America is we're all Americans and we're all in this together. Colorado's spirit of collaboration and Colorado's Hispanic Heritage Month is powerful. We had a fireside chat in our office with Polly Baca and Rosemary Rodriguez, both of whom have lived through so much history and who have such a inspiring perspective on how we work together to make progress. I want to share a little bit of that feeling on a few different dimensions. The first one we kind of talked about, John talked about, I mentioned it, diversity, equity, inclusion. How do we learn from one another and open up authentic conversations with a learning mindset and with a sense of we're all really wanting to create space for people to be their authentic selves, to be honest about who they are, about their life experience, and to listen to one another. That's it. That's not easy. That's really important. And to that point about listening, we're doing something called the Ginsburg Scalia initiative, which is to elevate the norm of respectful dialogue, engagement, and listening. I got to work for Justice Ginsburg and see that relationship up close. And Justice Scalia disagreed with her on important cases like the Virginia Military Institute case, and she welcomed disagreement in a respectful way. She had a sense of humor, she had a sense of grace, and she always thought, what can I learn from listening to others? How does it affect how I think? I worry about our society not being as open to listening, to respectful engagement. And we need to protect that space. That's what this initiative is about. I mentioned earlier, we need to protect one another, and we created a Colorado COVID legal relief initiative, getting lawyers to volunteer time to help businesses who need it. It's still standing up. We worked with the Colorado Lawyers Committee. It was an important way to respond creatively to what really was a serious crisis. And I want to end on two other notes about protecting the vulnerable, which is something I certainly get from my faith tradition. One is about opioids, and the second is about protecting consumers. The opioid epidemic has cut through every divide in our state, across skin color, across class, across geography. We all need to create space so that people can be honest about their struggles. We have to create more capacity to provide treatment and recovery for those who struggle with addiction. And we should not be putting people in jail because we don't have enough treatment options. And we don't have enough treatment options. We have about 16% of what we need. We're bringing back $400 million to Colorado through litigation against some of these pharmaceutical companies who've done some pretty irresponsible things. And we're going to make sure we put that money to work in our communities. Finally, protecting consumers, particularly those who are more vulnerable. Think about people who are Spanish speakers and who think that a notario is someone who can actually help them. But meanwhile, they're not providing real legal services. They're trying to pull one over. We want to educate people about what scams are out there. We want to protect people, which is why we've created both No Mas Fraude and Stop Fraud Colorado, two different websites, one in Spanish, one in English, where people can raise concerns. That's something where Anna has really been an incredible leader working to advance. So we've got a lot of work to do in terms of getting the word out for people. We want to help people. We believe that our whole system of government, our democracy, is a team sport, and we're here on the field with everybody.
No, thank you, Mr. Attorney General. And I think in the spirit of collaboration, I think it's important to be able to go through and kind of identify and acknowledge that we're at the tail end of Hispanic Heritage Month. And this was a month that was set up to be able to go through and to kind of acknowledge in the late 60s as an initial week, and then in the late 80s to be able to go through and celebrate a month. And we talked about this recently. The value is to be able to go through and initially kind of celebrate, but as we think about the role of it now, in this kind of COVID-based environment, I think it's important to be able to go through and kind of help educate other people that don't necessarily completely understand. And this is an informal DEI opportunity for us to help people understand that 70% of the minority population in Colorado is Hispanic. That Hispanic is not a race. Hispanic is an ethnicity. Hispanic, is some way that we may or may not identify as. I feel comfortable with the term. The organization I work for, has that in its title, but nevertheless, I also basically am, very aware and sensitive that not everybody identifies with that. And some prefer Latino or Latina, or Chicano or Latinx, or sometimes none of the above, but this is a way that, a race you can be Black Hispanic, white Hispanic, Asian Hispanic, indigenous Hispanic, and a combination of most. That maybe basically like in my father's generation, there was a greater sense basically on concern about colorism that we're still trying to unpack, and that while I am certain I have indigenous blood in me, it's something that maybe basically, other people wouldn't care to acknowledge in the past. It's important for me to be able to go through and let my kids know, that this is something that, we are a combination of, so as I think too, that although those big numbers I mentioned previously, the 62.5 million, those huge numbers, the 1.2 million in Colorado, it's also broken down in terms of it's not monolithic. It is representative of over 30 different countries of origin that some people choose to identify first of, multiple different geographies, different genders, different age groups, different levels of assimilation and acculturation, different choices of language, religion. So I think part of this also is acknowledging, that we are a lot more similar than we are different, but also being able to respect and really empathize with our differences too, as we collectively kind of try to go through that nobody has, some type of exclusivity basically in terms of access to this community, which is too big for any singular person, and that we're only going to be able to go through and move forward by being able to work together. And that I'm a fundamental believer too in this idea of like allyship, and that just because somebody's Hispanic doesn't guarantee they're a great advocate for Hispanics, and you don't have to be Hispanic to be a great advocate for Hispanics, that as we find ourselves basically at a somewhat disappointing, I think, couple weeks in terms of, the realistic possibility that, that immigration is not going to be part of the reconciliation. I think it's worth the attempt to go through, but if you have to ask me, do I think it's going to work? My gut instinct is no, and that's disappointing that we're not going to see immigration reform occur basically within this larger package, because I think all of us know how critical it is, and as John had mentioned, and I think the Attorney General, it's been devastating, to families that can't speak Spanish, that pre-COVID, that there was low amounts of health literacy, and all COVID did is amplify that, and expose these massive gaps, once again, Rosy and I were talking about, the need for basically, there wasn't really even a term for grant. We had to educate people on what a grant was, even beforehand. So I think there's still a lot of work to do, but I think we're going to be able to find that through collaboration. So one area that we've worked on in terms of really kind of helping, that we'd be more than willing to ask for additional information, but also are consistently kind of going through and collating, is really the data and the information. And whether basically, John had mentioned in terms of being able to go through and identify, I think identify different candidates to be able to go through, and find themselves basically in terms of the path to serving as a judge. I think part of it's the data in terms of identifying the disparities in terms of how few judges of color and how few judges basically of Hispanic or Latino descent currently are, or what the proportion basically of, this idea basically of actual law students, and thinking about that. We were recently at, I think, a little group, and somebody registered basically the URL of Reclaim the Road, and part of that was an attempt to basically, go through and say, how do we go through and kind of foster a greater pipeline, kind of coming in basically in terms of this profession. Or it's thinking about, different data in terms of, from, Hispanic contractors in terms of some of the disparities and opportunities in terms of being able to go through and highlight, some of the challenges in terms of the size of the contracts and the need to break up the contracts. And a lot of this gets into very finite, and complicated information, but how do we make it a little bit more consumable, not only basically for the general public to understand what the opportunities and challenges are, but also for our legislators. And I think, as Rosy had mentioned previously, and I think, Andra is working on, a lot of this is going to be moving like, via the levers of public policy, and really kind of educating our current members of the General Assembly, and making sure that we're providing different types of political cover, for Andra's appointed position, or Attorney General Weiser's elected position, in terms of helping to support the things that we know are really dear and important to us. So with that, I want to go through and maybe start with Rosy in terms of some different opportunities in terms of collaboration that you've seen or you're looking to do this upcoming year.
Sure. Thank you, Mike, for mentioning all the acronyms, and sometimes I lose track of me talking in code, honestly, and yeah, absolutely. And all the acronyms that I use were construction organizations, for construction-based organizations like AGC, Associated General Contractors, or Colorado Contractors Association, and things like that. So, because those are our best advocates. However, on the technical side, lately, one of the companies that joined HCC and that we've been working with is called Blue Book. Blue Book is, as very few people know it, it's an organization that works a lot with construction companies, and then recently went through a merger, and now they merge with a company that has a huge database of construction companies. And so one of the interesting things for me, because I'm a total nerd, I'm a mathematician and total nerd, is to kind of figure out how to massage that database and how to utilize that database to the benefit of the rest of the membership, right? So creating collaborations in areas like that for me are extremely interesting, because they are new, because there are some things that nobody has looked at that. And so it is interesting that you mentioned collaborations. Now, another organization that we have gotten really, really close is COMTO. COMTO is a transportation organization that also has a lot of things that we don't have, because we are more construction driven, right? However, within construction, transportation is a big portion of it. You know, you have all that aggregate transportation that you have to have in a construction project and things like that. So those are some of the things that we're opening our eyes to, and we've never done it in the past, and we are consolidating some MOUs with some of those organizations, and it's fantastic to see how you can find synergy and points in common within our organizations.
No, thank you, Rosy. And I think it's important to be able to go through and kind of highlight. Andrew had mentioned previously, you know, that this was a great time to start a business and a great time to grow a business. And I also want to be able to go through and add on top of that I think we will see once in a lifetime generational dollars coming down from the federal government in regard to infrastructure. So there is a tremendous opportunity for a lot of the businesses that Rosy and I work with, specifically Rosy in a lot of different ways. And I think with that, you know, it's going to be really important to make sure that they definitely organizationally or individually have different legal help. And I think, Jonathan, this is an opportunity for your organization to be able to kind of step in and support, you know, because we are going to see, like I said, once in a lifetime generational dollars kind of come in. And it is very nuanced in terms of how this actually goes through and gets kind of distributed. I will tell you, I was on part of a working group that the first week, let's say 2 weeks into COVID, and I'm forgetting the name of the group that Mike Kopp runs. If Rosy or Mr. Attorney General, Colorado Concern, you know, have put together a group basically of business leaders throughout the state, you know, and they already knew infrastructure dollars were going to come down. It was just a question of time. So they put recommendations together, you know, and this was the first couple, I mean, the report was done, I think, 6 weeks into COVID, you know, knowing that there was going to be support basically from the federal government coming in a couple different trenches. You know, so I think it's really important to be able to go through and make sure that we're able to help these businesses kind of access and make sure the dollars get put down in not only a proportional way, but also an equitable way, you know, where we can. And whether that's actually the contracting side or it's making sure actually the individual municipalities, you know, are able to support with their kind of like buckets of dollars to make sure that they're supporting the communities appropriately. So with that, Jonathan, I know you touched on the legal clinics and some of the work you did with MICASA, but you know, if there's an opportunity for you to talk a little bit more about maybe what you see as some potential collaboration in the future, that'd be great.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's really important, especially I would say a meeting like this kind of brings together organizations and leadership that we're all rowing in the same direction. So it's important to kind of get on the same page. And this is kind of a great opportunity to bring those individuals and those organizations together. So thank you again. We have kind of, I think it's important to kind of systematically go through, reach out to these other organizations, establish those connections, and find common ground. So, you know, to the extent that I already mentioned the legal clinics that we're trying to partner with, local resource centers that do the community outreach, how can we help? Well, we found a way that, look, we can provide the attorneys, we can staff those legal clinics and provide that access to the legal profession. You know, Mike, I know our organizations reached out to you guys, and we've had conversations about how can we partner? How can the membership of the chamber benefit from interactions with the attorneys of the Hispanic Bar? And I know obviously, you know, our attorneys can benefit from those business relationships. These are, I mean, this is low-hanging fruit. These are, you know, organizations that are trying to accomplish the same objectives, and there's no reason there shouldn't be that type of a partnership. So these are, you know, long story short is that I think we have a lot of opportunities to kind of make those connections and make sure that we are kind of advancing our community and benefiting our members.
Thank you, Jonathan. And Andra, as we, you know, look towards the future, how do we work with your office? How do other organizations best work with your office? You know, I think one of the challenges in a lot of minority organizations, minority nonprofits, is sometimes our inability to find funding to actually grow our own capacity, you know, considering, you know, all the work and stress we're under. And we've seen, I think over the last year and a half, there's a lot of bigger organizations that kind of are, you know, going through what I would call almost like mission creep. And I think on one side, we see what I would refer to as almost like philanthropic redlining. that there is a lack of understanding and some blind spots, whether it's, the classic, basically like, unconscious, or is it, a little bit more deliberate? But there are some blind spots, even at foundations, in terms of basically understanding exactly the diversity of the Hispanic community, what the impact can and should be. But then again, too, you've seen a lot of big organizations kind of go through and kind of chase the dollars on the DEI side in anywhere along these spaces, right? So what is it that you think is the best route for a lot of, our smaller minority-based organizations to be able to build capacity and get any type of federal support? And then what are some other ways you think that we can work with you?
Excellent question. So a few of the things that a lot of people don't realize is there's been diversity programs within the federal space for decades. And there's different types, as we kind of mentioned. There's grants, there's small business certifications. And that's one of the things that my expertise truly comes in on, is a lot of times as a small business, we may not understand or know, as a minority business, some of the technical channels that are out there to help us, right? And a lot of as I stated, a lot of these programs have been around 30, 50 years, but we just never knew about it. So sometimes it takes a little bit more hand-holding, a little bit slower pace to bring from someone who do not understand those programs to where they can utilize them and become truly successful. And so that is really my job. My job is to take someone who's a small business or entrepreneur and say, okay, we can get you from point A to point B. Here's what we have to know. Here are the different organizations that are out here to help you, and I can help you navigate those systems. We can help you navigate that. One of the things that we're beginning to work with now is with HCC and with Rosy. We're working together to work with Hispanic and Latina companies to help them grow, right? Women-owned businesses in the minority community who have typically been overlooked, right? Or now becoming powerhouses, right? So the power is in the knowledge. And my own personal belief is if I can show someone how to become economically stable, economically viable by having their own company. And when I say company, you can just be a consultant. You could be a single person consultant. I have single person companies that are doing millions of dollars, right? But it's the knowledge, it's the understanding how these systems work. And the MBDA, that's really what we specialize in, is really showing you and helping you navigate this bureaucratic system so that you can become successful.
No, thank you. Thank you. That's great help. And just making sure that I'm sensitive to everybody's day and schedule and time and, commitments. We're getting close to the hour, so we've got about 4 minutes left. So with that, I would like to ask our Attorney General to talk about some of the upcoming challenges and opportunities, and really kind of provide a little bit of a closing for this wonderful chance to be able to kind of come together and talk about these things briefly.
I want to underscore that coming back from this experience of a pandemic has left so many people reeling from trauma that has been exacerbated by other events. So think about wildfires that affected some people in our state in very profound ways. Think about issues of confronting and working on racial justice, which is always challenging and important conversation. Think about the fact that many people lost loved ones during COVID, which we know has not been equal. People of color, Hispanic individuals are more likely to have suffered. We've got a lot of fallout, a lot of work to do. And part of what we can do is support one another and create space for people to open up about what is going on with them. And so I would encourage people to take time, and part of what is going to be happening as we leave the Zoom world, we're returning to our offices in January, is reconnecting, rebuilding relationships. That's going to have a spiritual dimension, an emotional dimension, and that's healthy and normal. And so I just say, give each other grace, recognize what we've been through is really hard, and that there will be lessons and learning and challenges that we need to work through together. And having organizations like the Chamber that bring people together particularly along shared history. And this is where Hispanic Heritage Month is worth underscoring. This is a powerful history. When we chatted with Polly and Rosemary, Polly is related to the person who founded Trinidad. Baca County is named for Felipe Baca, Polly's relative. And Ken Salazar, now ambassador to Mexico, just shared with some historic work, said his family didn't come to the United States of America. The United States came to his family. So learning, sharing that history, finding strength in that history. And I loved your point, Mike, about how all of us have different interconnections. I wanted to ask you, you may have some Sephardic Jewish background going on there too, which Polly said she does. And that's part of a shared history and shared connections. Let's embrace that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you very much. And, you know, and with all this too, I just want to be able to go through, and despite the many challenges, I think one thing I want to highlight is the resilience of our community. And I love the fact that U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, had mentioned, and she had a quote basically that I will go through and just read really quickly. She talked about Hispanic entrepreneurs can lead us out of a crisis again. I know Hispanic workers can power our recovery potentially in even a bigger way than a decade ago, so long as we remove the longstanding barriers that have been in your way. Latinos were disproportionately hit in the 4 previous economic recessions. Stagflation in the 70s, the recession of the early 80s, the first dot-com bubble, and the Great Recession in the 2000s. If somebody designed an economic crisis to unduly harm the Hispanic community, they would probably come up with something that looks a lot like COVID-19. At the end of the day, it will probably still be true that the pandemic economy followed the historic trend and hit the Hispanic community harder than many other groups. In fact, if history is any guide, Hispanic-owned business will drive a large portion of our country's recovery. So with that, I just want to say thank you once again, Mr. Attorney General, and for everybody joining. Thank you, John. Thank you, Andra. Thank you, Rosy. And thank you for all of those that are viewing on Facebook Live and will watch later on as we know. And with that, I hope everybody has a great night and continues their wonderful Hispanic Heritage Month celebration.
Thanks, everybody. Great being with you.
Thank you.